going to work and basically motivating yourself to get out of bed every morning. Um, a little bit about what a number of people have talked about, but more on how you actually get these kind of things done. So if you look at the book club review that happened last Sunday, and on the book Die Empty, the key thing that Sanjeev talked about, I haven't read the book, but the key thing he talked about is your day-to-day functioning is a lot of mundane stuff. You go to work in the morning, look in your computer, get through the emails, get through something else, and then begin firefighting. Somebody brings you problem A, B, C, and you start dealing with each one of them. So our day-to-day life is mundane, boring, structured, scheduled, take any word that you want, but Monday could be the same as Tuesday, Tuesday can be the same as Wednesday, and you basically go through the same routine. At the end of the day, you come back, and if you reflect on it, sometimes you say, okay, I achieved something, sometimes you say you don't. And a typical example that I love to talk about are these security guards who are outside hotels. They spend the whole day standing out in the sun looking for things, and when they go back home, their wife asks them, so how was your day? Well, I looked and I looked and I found nothing. And that's his success. So all of us have some form of that in our day-to-day life. All of us have some form of that in what we do. So I'm now going to talk about what some of us look at and how we make things work for ourselves. Once you enter the business world, you start looking at other businesses for inspiration, other businesses for direction. Somebody mentioned Steve Jobs, and that's a quote from Steve Jobs, which says the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking, don't settle. And that's what Steve Jobs said. Now, the critical thing is that most of these people talk about inspiration after the fact. When I looked through and read about how people were successful and what did they do, I was always curious that what was Newton thinking about when he was sitting under the tree that made him come to the conclusion that that apple is gravity? What the hell was he thinking about? What was Steve Jobs thinking about when he started this whole thing? Not what he looked back and talked about to say that, you've got to love what you do to be good. So almost every quote that we look at for inspiration, we look at to give us some sort of guidance in what we're trying to do, almost every one of them came after the fact, after the person had done something. And for me, it became very important to sort of think about what was the guy thinking about before he did this? Because that's what allowed him to do what he did. And that's what allowed him to come to the position to make that quote. And the conclusion I came to is that these guys were basically thinking about things or imagining things or dreaming about things. In the mid-80s, I had Reliance Industries as a major customer for the people that we were working with. And somebody there mentioned that one of Reliance's goals is that every single household in India should spend a part of their money on a Reliance product. In the mid-80s, the only commercial product Reliance had was only Vimal. You don't even hear about it today. That fabric company is gone. But you look at what's happening in Reliance today, whether it is retail, the way they cover it, whether it is telecom, whether it is petrol, there are a whole lot of things where they're moving towards what I heard then as something that they were keen on. So what do you define that as? Do you define that as inspiration? Do you define that as, what is it? So I picked it as saying it is a dream. Somebody or the other had a dream and said, this is what I think we should be about. Now, for each person, there is a dream. And you've got to be able to figure it out. It may change every day. It may change every week. Until you come to one that you say, okay, I think this is the one that I want to go with. Um, in our own natural lives, each one of us has been a kid with a parent. A parent has a dream for us. What do we do about that? What makes them most proud is when their dream sort of gets achieved, or they inspire you to achieve the dream that you had. Each person is different. You can't say that all kids should become engineers, or all kids should become a lawyer, or all kids should become this. When I went to boarding school, you were expected to play and participate in everything. I wasn't interested in running 100 meters in whatever 19 seconds or something that was there. I did it, got out, got the tick mark as an achievement, and that my interest there faded. So each person is different. They've got to pick their little spot that they look at and figure out how they want to be able to work on that. When I think about an artist, or that Shiv mentioned, or a scientist in the mid 80s, mid 1800s, what were they looking at? They didn't have money as a goal. They were trying to figure something out, and they had their imagination to guide them to say, this is what we've got to look at. And that, in my logic, is a dream. How is that different from a goal? Goals are usually close-ended, quantifiable, money defined. This quarter, my goal is to do that. This, at the end of this year, this is what my goal is to do to achieve this. Dreams are usually open-ended, gray, nebulous kinds of things. A lot of us, because of the background that we came from, have that question: how do I dream? I'm a realist. I work with things that are absolutely real. How do I start imagining these things? The solution to that is, it will come to you. You don't have to actually try it. You just have to be conscious of the fact that these things exist, and you can pick on it. A statement that I've put there, which is, I'm absolutely clear on my goals. I will do this tomorrow and buy that this year, and retire on a desert island in 2020. Now, these are goals where you don't know what you're going to do next. You don't know how it's going to happen. You don't know what's going to go through. And the anecdotal WhatsApp joke that is doing the rounds, that everybody in 2015 who were asked the question, so where do you see yourself 5 years from now, should all be sacked from their jobs. But a dream does not have these timelines, does not have things like this attached to it, but it helps you to work this thing through. It helps you to understand that, I think something like that is right. A lot of these dreams, if you want them to actually work, have to, in some form or fashion, be able to inspire the people around you. And inspiring the people around you is what most people's dreams are about. So again, going back to, how does a parent inspire a child? How does it work naturally in life? Why did somebody decide to have a particular hairstyle or wear a particular shirt? They saw a movie star, that movie star inspired them to wear that shirt, to have that swagger, to be able to talk in a particular manner. These are forms of inspiration that all of us have been through. We see it around us, and that sort of inspiration is what actually makes each one of us, when you see somebody being inspired by you, puts you up on that pedestal in that little group, and that's what becomes very important to all of us. You don't need to be famous to a billion people. You can be the inspiration for one person, and that is equally satisfying for everybody. One of the things that dreams allows you to do is, you have some sort of an end state. That I see this in shades of gray. I see this villa that I want to be living in, or I see this kid becoming famous, or I see that bunch of people actually having a career. So the debate that we had talked about is net worth or the worth of a person measured in money. There's that organization that we read about in Bihar called Top 30 or something like that, where there's this IIT graduate who's trying to inspire kids to go out and change their lives and become somebody. So that dream that he had of saying, I'm going to be able to generate X number of or as many people as I can as engineers out of here and put them up there was the thing that actually wanted was the dream. And then the guy actually started living it. So the end state, once you go through one dream or the other, there's an end state that will start becoming gray and fuzzy. You'll be able to see it. And once you start being able to see it, you'll find your way, your own natural way of doing things. There is no chart, there is nothing there. And I keep going back to the parent-child relationship. How do you inspire people to go out and do things? So the kid needs to have a skill set, and the kid needs to have this inspirational goal of where they want to go and how they want to do things. Use exactly the same model in the business world, and it begins to work. So you will find your own way of doing things. Be as natural as you can. More educated you are about it, the more you look at and read things, the more natural it'll become on how you do this. Going back to, again, the comments that Sanjeev made about die empty, is how do you learn how to give what you have got as knowledge or experience and stuff like that? You will find your way of how to do it. And as long as that remains your focus. And never lose sight of the end state. Because once you think that this is a dream that I'd like to stay with, for that period of time, keep that end state in mind. Most of us in day-to-day life start dealing with the next step. So what do I do next? What do I do next? Without seeing that where's that next actually going to get us to. So that end state is an important thing to look at, because it then determines your next state. And what happens then is that you will create your own quotes along the way. Going back again to the more natural parent-child relationship, a lot of parents inherited an expression or a word. My father used to like to say, Khote da put. I don't know whether he was calling me a name or he was calling himself a name, but it's an expression that comes about. Some of us pick those up and continue to use it. Some of us pick up how we do things from our bosses or our colleagues and say, that's how we're going to do things and that's what's going to happen. And then we create an expression or a quote of our own. One of those that I created once when I was going through stuff, it actually started when I was in college, and I had to, we had this, I forget what it was, a course that we had to just sort of pass. It was not counted towards a grade. It was called History of Science. And I had to study this book, and I studied 6 questions, and I said, if 3 of them come, I'm okay. None of those 6 questions came. And somebody at the end of that exam asked me, so how did it go? I said, I had all the answers, the questions were all wrong. And I actually took that as one of my quotes along into life. And when I became leader of a team and we were trying to sell a new concept to a lot of people in India, I told my team, I said, you cannot get the wrong answer. Your question is always wrong. Ask the right question, you'll always get the right answer. And today, when those guys use that, and I see them posting it on Facebook or on LinkedIn and things like that, they say there's no such thing as wrong answers, they're only the wrong question. I said, hang on, the guy's not giving me credit for having given him this quote. But you end up creating these kinds of quotes along with it. Each one of us has it in us. Each one of us can end up producing that. And those things then begin to inspire people. So like I put up a Steve Jobs quote when we started, it was an inspiration for me at one point in time, but more to find out what was he thinking before he started rather than what happened there. Now, the graphic on this slide, which shows rail tracks, is actually contraindicative of what I've been talking about. But it's how a journey starts. You've got some sort of guideline on where you're going to get to. But journeys are never like that. They're never on rails that you say it's all going to go there. these things always change. But to start with, there has to be, I have an end state. That's where I've got to get to. So this is my way of getting there. And then you'll hit a hurdle, and then you've got to find some other way of doing things. But as long as we keep the end state in mind, each one of us will be able to chart a path through there. When you hit that hurdle, a lot of people treat it as a negative incident in life. I treat that, and I always say that is an opportunity. You can call them accidents if you like, you can call them luck. A lot of us would have an experience like this. I was at this meeting and I met this guy there by accident, and he opened a door for me with this doctor in the US. It's not an accident. The meeting could have been accidental, but the opening of the door for this doctor in the US was no accident. It's because you always had that as your focus. How do I do it naturally? I may have a passion to say I want to own a 1932 Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost. I don't think I'll ever do that, but let's say that's what it was. So when I meet somebody, as the conversation goes along, I will naturally, at some point in time in that conversation, say, so are you interested in cars? Do you know anything about cars? Because that was my dream. That was an end I had. And that becomes part of my conversation. So somewhere I meet somebody and he says, I actually saw a Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost here. Now, it's not an accident. It's not luck. It's how I actually stay aware of what I want, and I make these accidents happen, and I make this luck happen. And that's what's important for a lot of us to do that. And when that happens, you begin to start achieving things, and people see, oh, this guy's managed to do this. And that's what satisfaction really comes from, in how you inspire people and how you conduct yourself, and how that bit goes through. A great learning for this actually came from the business that Anil started out in, and how do you inspire a Gurkha Johnny to go out and do that? Every one of those regiments have got big party days that they have for their heroes who may have been heroes 100 years ago. But that whole party day is designed to say, kid, tomorrow this regiment could have a party for you every day if you become a hero. And that sort of inspiration is what keeps that part of the business going. In our businesses, that inspiration could be the way you say things, the way you do things, the way you, the expressions that you use. They begin to inspire people and saying, this is what I want to do. And you pick your own inspirations from the people you deal with and how you work with. And as I said, along the way, you'll make your own set of quotes, knowingly or unknowingly. And that's how things will work. So before I then have a real life example of how a lot of this stuff actually works. So if any of you have any questions at this point in time on what I've said, I can just spend a minute or two trying to answer it before I go forward on the next thing. Okay, let's do the questions at the end. So what I talked about was my accident. So my accident started with premises being available in the building that I live in, and a tenant was being sought, and I was tasked with looking for a tenant. And there were all these constraints about it to say it should be quiet after hours. This is a residential area. We shouldn't do this. We shouldn't do that. And we should look at this and we should look at that. And we just weren't able to find the right kind of tenant. And somebody came up with the idea saying, why don't we do something there that one of us can do? And so I said, well, yeah, why not? Let's look at a business. We tried to get a franchise for an Apple store. And eventually the idea came out of saying, let's set up a restaurant or a cafe. And given my background, we then got into strategy, business, this, that. What are we going to do? How much does it take? What's the rent? What's the cost? We did all the number work that each one of us get down to doing, and started researching what is this business? Never been in the business, so what is it? Where do you go? And there was a business exposition on called Ahar, which is where a lot of the food industry people who sell equipment, sell stuff go there. So I went to that in 2017, early days, to see what was happening. And on my way out of there, I was walking to the metro station because there was a big crowd. I told my driver to come to the next station, pick me up. I said, I'd take the metro out of there. And there was a complete stranger who was walking beside me, who asked me, आपके लिए आप क्या करने आए थे? I said, मैं equipment देखने आया था. तो मिल गया आपको जो मिलना था? I had a handful of brochures in my hand. I said, yes, काफ़ी कुछ मिल गया. I said, आपके लिए कैसा था? He said, जी मैं हिमाचल से आया हूँ, मैं फूड प्रोसेसिंग में काम करता हूँ, तो नहीं था मुझे कुछ. So then he asked me, आप क्या करना चाहते हो? I said, मैं रेस्टोरेंट खोलने की सोच रहा हूँ. He asked me, आपको कोई एक्सपीरियंस है रेस्टोरेंट में? I said, नहीं, मेरे पास अभी एक्सपीरियंस नहीं है रेस्टोरेंट में. So he came up with that line, आपको खाने और खिलाने का शौक होगा. And I still remember that line. He was a complete stranger. I don't know who he was, but that's the line he came up with. And I agreed with him at once. I said, हाँ, मुझे खाने और खिलाने का शौक है. And that became the defining line on what we did thereafter. So we created this logo, Fat Jar. What was it supposed to signify? And how the cafe evolved after that all got defined by that one line. And you call that an accident with the guy. I just met a guy out there and he came up with this line. Because the key thing became, what does khilane ka shauk hoga mean? So I thought about it and I said, in life again, who has a shock of khilana? You start from being a kid. It's your parent, mother, father, whoever was responsible for feeding you. That was the khilane ka shauk. They got excited about doing this. So I said, well, this stays with everybody through life. So what defines it? Warm and cozy, sensory, safe, familiar, caring, recognition. And then we said, let's build all of these soft aspects into the product we're trying to put out. So coming from the background that I came from, which was strategy, everything was defined and make out business plans and put the whole thing together, I was suddenly dealing with stuff that was not measurable. How do you measure warm and cozy? How do you measure sensory? How do you measure safe? How do you measure any of these things? But that's what the definition of khilane ka shauk ended up being. So we sat down and defined each one of these aspects and said, this is what we've got to do. So sensory, smell, temperature, feel, who's the person who's there, and built literally each one of these attributes into the product Fat Jar and put it out there. I could go through telling you how we tackled each one of them, but this is what became the definition of what does khilane ka shauk really mean. And then we opened the cafe and we went through food trials. And when we were going through food trials, this business that started as saying, let's do something that in this place and got defined by a stranger's words, I got guys who I went to school with when I was between the ages of 10 and 16 to come in for food trials at the end of December 2017. And one of them came up with the line saying, I knew you always wanted to do this. I spent 35 years selling technology. I didn't know I wanted to run a restaurant. So where did this come from? So it was obviously a dream that I had at some point in time, spoke to somebody about it. It was the back of my head, came there. And that's when the recognition suddenly happened, saying, yes, maybe this was something I really wanted to do. And that's what put all the passion into building this. And more importantly, in dealing with stuff that I was not used to dealing with, which was not necessarily measurable, quantifiable pieces that defined this particular business. So the accident continued, that I was in a business that I always wanted to be in, and it did not happen by conscious design or stuff like that. It just happened by process of elimination, and it ended up being there. Now, is that a process of elimination that I should believe in, or is that a process of elimination that my mind actually drove me to because that's what I wanted to do? Pick it. So once the restaurant opened, so what does Fat Jar sell? Italian food, Mediterranean food, sauces, dips, wine, cheese, cocktails, beer. That's the clinical way of looking at it. A lot of people do that. So, what is different about Fatja? We basically sell an experience because all those, that khilane ka shock piece manifested itself. So, we then, the team basically went out and looked at saying that we want to sell an experience. So, who were the people we hired, how we put them together became critical. So, when the restaurant idea came about, we didn't know what food we were going to put out. So I put it out on our school group. Does anybody have a kid, nephew, somebody who's niece, who's a chef who would like to work? And one of the guys came up saying that I have a nephew who's keen on doing something. So we talked. What can you do? This is what you can do. Okay, we built a restaurant that would allow that to happen. Then we hired a person from who was the maitre d' at the Italian restaurant at the Oberoi, who got laid off because the Oberoi in Delhi shut down for renovation. And he thought he was beyond his sell by date because he was 55 years old or 52 years old. I said, no, the age has got nothing to do with it. I need you for the experience that you can provide and the leadership you can provide on the team. So we hired the guy. So eventually, what we were selling was an experience. Person walks in, how they're greeted, what the temperature in the room is, what the room smells like, what they're coming there for. The quality of food became important, but all the other things around the quality of food became even more important. The size of the table, the fact that the table does not shake, how does technology work, how does everything work, to ensure that the soft issues were all taken care of. And that really became the guiding factor. So it's not that we were selling a lot of these things. Yes, clinically we were selling all of that, but as far as the team was concerned, that is what we were selling. The experience was happiness. So during this accident, what quotable quote did I come up with? I actually used one that I had used earlier in life when we were trying to sell connectivity to various corporations in India to connect them to the world. I sold the first internet connections that the erstwhile VSNL bought to connect to the rest of the world. And then as the IT and call center business started, we basically connected almost 90% of those companies to the rest of the world. But all of them kept coming up with the what is the price? And that's where we brought out this, or I came up with this line saying price is only a concept. It's what you're trying to provide. Put that there, and then you find that there is no price to it. So that's the key consultative selling strategy that the team started adopting, where a customer could call back and say, I now need air conditioning installed here. What is the best air conditioning that I can put in? We were selling telecom services. We were not selling air conditioning. But because the person trusted our salesperson that much, they could call up. So price didn't matter at that point in time. And that's what came in. So we used the same quotable quote in the business that we are in, and price is only a concept. And coming back to where I started, this accident basically came back and looked at it. The only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it, keep looking, don't settle, which is what at Fatja we keep trying to put out and do. Is I love going to work, keep changing things, keep making them better, keep making them something that customers would like. And each one of these things can be replicated in whatever business you are in. And as long as you think through to the end state that this is what I want to do, customer walks in, I want to make that customer happy and make them come back. So our key customers end up being 6-year-old kids because we recognize them. We used to give them a place to sit. They had their own menu, and they would drive their parents to say they wanted to come there. The parents could come and have an adult meal and have their own drink and feel that their kids were safe in this environment. So how those things defined dealing with the customer became very, very critical, and basically gives us a lot of satisfaction. Is it a profitable business? Not yet. It will be, but it's an extremely satisfying business for the people that work there. It's a pretty satisfying business for the customers that we have. They tend to come back there quite often, and that's how it works. That's me. Thank you. And any questions?
I just want to add something to what Deepak said, if that's okay.
Yes, sure.
Well, since the lockdown started till today, never really went out anywhere, only been out 3 or 4 times, and that's to his restaurant and nowhere else till today. That's
Thank you.
because every word of what he said is true. And I can say, what a wow presentation.
Thank you.
And Shiv, you are not alone in going to his restaurant the 3 or 4 times that you went. Yours truly accompanied you every time, right? With a better house.
Absolutely correct, Sanjeev.
Deepak, may I have a few questions? Can I just ask you something, please?
Yes, of course I do.
Okay. Firstly, it was a marvelous presentation. I'm intrigued to hear why and how you arrived at the word fat jar. The word fat, when a person is entering a restaurant, may be counterproductive. Guy would like to feel I should remain slim and eat well. And your food is absolutely par excellence, no question of it. So I'm just intrigued how fat jar came to stay. Second thing I'd like to know is, see, you spoke of soft issues being in place and how much effort you put into setting up those soft issues, like the table not making that sound of tilting this way or that, the ambience being absolutely spot on, and the table sizes and everything was, and the air conditioning and the lighting, everything is very good. Now, those things we tend to start taking for granted. We don't miss them when they're there. So the key lies in awesome food. If the food is beyond expectations or at least up to the mark, then those other things you tend to take them for granted because they are there. If they aren't there, yes, it makes a big point that the setup of the food is good, but the setup is not up to the mark. Here, your setup on which you've spent so much time and thought and money, does it not get taken for granted? I mean, it's an awesome experience, no doubt about it. So, second question is about the soft issues being taken for granted. And the third one I'd like to just ask you is, you said your key customers are 6-year-olds with parents coming in and feeling comfortable. I'd like to think that the key customers are the 60-year-olds who have the time of their lives out there. I'd like your opinion on all these 3 points, please.
Okay.
And they come from my heart.
Absolutely. So let's start with the second one, which is the soft warm issues, non-quantifiable bits that are in there. We went back to the mother-child relationship. The mother-child relationship takes everything for granted in all of those 6 or 7 points that I had put on that slide of what does khilane ka shauk really mean. And you take each one of these things for granted. It's got food nowhere in it. Okay, it's the security of the place, the comfort, the smell of being close to your mother. That whole safe and comfortable environment became critical. So it is taken for granted when that child goes to the mother to eat a meal. And that is taken for granted. So we used exactly the same concept to say this is taken for granted. I don't need to highlight it and talk about it to people. But when somebody does notice it and say, oh, that's a nice smell in the room. So what is that smell about? The why it is there is inconsequential. The fact that something happened with it, and thank you for the kind words, because that did work with you to a large extent. So yes, people take it for granted. You take it for granted as much as you took it when you went to your mother for a meal. And that is the nice thing about it when people take it for granted, because then once they feel it 2 or 3 times, then they want to keep coming back to that, not as a conscious decision to say, I want to go there because the air conditioning is right. They want to go there for the experience of what we're trying to provide, and that's the key piece. The sixth, coming to the second question, which is the defining segment. I may have said that, which is 6-year-old is a key customer. It's one of the key customers. Single women working in Delhi was another key constituent that we used to have during the day, because they had to wait somewhere for a meeting or or sit down to have lunch somewhere, this was a place that they found nobody was bothering them. They could be there, they could work comfortably, and they could get whatever they wanted. So each constituency became different. The 60-year-old, or more than 60, let's call them everybody over the age of 60, is a very critical component of our customer base. And that's the customer base that is coming back the slowest during the lockdown, because they suddenly felt very comfortable being in a place where they could speak to somebody about what they wanted and speak directly on things that were there. They did not need an introduction, they did not need a background, and they could talk to either the chef or the guy with the maitre d' or me. We were always on the floor and be able to work things out. So we had foreigners that constituted almost 20% of our business of people who used to live around here, most of whom have disappeared at this point in time. So each one of these people had their own reason for wanting to come there in this list of reasons. And then, yes, you cannot ever disappoint on food. Food is the hero of that's the key reason they've come there. They've not necessarily come there to watch TV or do something else like that. They've come there to eat, have a meal, have a cup of coffee, whatever it was. But these things became very, very, very critical in what we were looking at. And this is what led to the answer to your first question, which was, how did Fat Jar come about? One of the things that we wanted to do was create a unique name that we could trademark and protect. And as the lawyer on the group will say, that how do I make sure that another Fat Jar doesn't come up, because it's not a protected thing. So when we went through name options, we realized we had to concoct a name, put one together. Again, dropping back to my ethnic background, the concept of a ghee ka pipa, which became a derogatory term for somebody who was too fat, but was also a piece of equipment that existed in virtually every Punjabi kitchen. You had to put that dollop of pure ghee on whatever you produced to make sure it tasted good, became part of that warm and sensory thing. So when we did a dipstick survey with about 15, 20 people, what does it connote? To most people, it connoted that it was something nice. It was a cookie jar, it was achar ka martaban, or it was this, or it was that. It connoted something nice. The word that came second was a word called Jameo, Jameo. And that seemed to connote a meeting place to a lot of people. It was again a concocted word. So what we trademarked was one word, Fat Jar, which is 6-letter word, eventually, and then built a logo where it broke up so that you could then trademark the logo subsequently. So because trying to trademark two words, fat and jar, was not permitted because they were considered too generic. So we trademarked the 6-letter word and then split it up in the logo and then trademarked the logo. And that's it. That's how it came about.
Thanks. If nobody else is asking, I have one more intriguing question to ask you that was mentioned in your CV. Yes. What exactly does it convey when they say you are often the first employee of a company? That means you are there to take risk more than others. You are a daring person, always ready to rush into a new venture, to be the first employee of the company or the employer of the company. I mean, what exactly did that mean? And B, how much of this 30 years of corporate experience help you in administering the Fat Jar setup or running it? Does it really, I mean, are you bringing your pluses to the table here, or it's a brand new venture in every which way? And your past corporate experience of guiding telecom as well as other sectors hasn't really been of immediate help here? Just wanted your is it implied or explicit or implicitly?
Okay, again, let me start with the second aspect first. One of the things that your background and my background of having been to boarding school was you were not afraid of doing any work. Yeah. So I use that that attitude or that skill through my 30 years in corporate life, where I could do the job of the junior most person with him or her, holding their hand and leading them through it. So when I hired a new salesperson, I would work with that salesperson through what they did and get them their first order and say, this is how it's done, literally show them exactly how it happened, rather than sit at my desk and talk to them about, this is what you got to do and go do it yourself. If you don't get an order within the next 3 months, go look for another job. I'd actually show them how it was done. And to be able to do that, and that's what I did through my life basically, is work with people to ensure that they were successful. And as soon as they became successful with what they were trying to do, it made my life a lot easier. I could sit down and dream and think about other stuff because these guys were all doing their job properly. So that aspect of what I used during my time in the corporate world is what I used here also. So if I can go to a table, get an order from the customer, and then pick up the food and deliver it to the customer and clear the table from there, the server that I've got says, if this guy can do it like this, I can do it also. And that inspires that guy to try and do the same thing. So my confidence in then empowering that person to make any decision that is required to ensure that happiness is delivered to the customer becomes more much easier for me to empower the guy, because I know exactly how he's working. So if a customer has got a bottle of wine and says, I don't like the taste of it, the guy at once says, I'll take it back, no hassles. It's his decision, it's his authority there, and that's how he works. Because he saw me do it, and I said, this is how you can do it. Okay, let's make this work.
True.
So that becomes very critical, and that's one of the key things that happen. The rest of it, as I mentioned, how to make a business plan, how to do this, how to do that, is where we started. It's what drives every business critically. But what's the thing that actually makes me want to get up and go to work every day is a lot of these soft issues that are around it, because that's what keeps things exciting. That's what, when I see the next guy trying to do things that are important there, which he has never done in his life before. It's brand new, and the guy's actually trying to copy it. I said, that's what works here. And so that's the
Thanks.
piece of what came out of there. On the first question of being the first employee, through a lot of businesses, the first time I became the first employee that was a company I used to work for, one of the HCL group companies in Delhi, and we the boss decided that we wanted to set up a company in Europe. So I did a lot of desk work, and then I went into Scandinavia and into Stockholm as the first employee to go out and sell IT services on doing real-time device programming, which is basically programming chips to go out and do things into an environment I'd never been in before, and nothing. So at the end of the first year, we did about $1.5 million of revenue with almost 90% margin on it. So it took care of all the costs, and we were profitable literally year one. I did it for myself once when I decided that consulting was a good business, and in the late 90s, I set up a consulting firm when everybody and their mother-in-law wanted to be in the telecoms business in India. I had no knowledge of the telecom industry, but I knew what India was about. So I set up a company offering consulting services. With the governments continuing to change over the next 2 or 3 years and policy basically not going properly, I was forced to get back into the corporate world. And then I was the first employee in an American multinational company's operations in India, and so on. That's how it happened. So it basically, you chart your own way when you're the first employee. You've got the backing of somebody to write the checks, but you chart your own way. And once in a while, you get into a business where you write the checks, and you still have to chart your own way. So
True.
That's what it is.
Great. Thank you so much. I think, Kanchan, we're running short of time now. So request you.
I don't have a question. I just have a few words for Deepak, which is that, your session after my conversation with you, I realized would be very interesting and very inspiring, and that's how it's come out to be. And I'd like you to make a little change in that line where you say what did खिलाने का शौक mean? It should say प्यार से खिलाने का शौक mean.
क्या बात.
Because other things that you talk of sensory is all about how you do it and how you take care of people. So it should be प्यार से खिलाने का शौक.
Absolutely, Kanchan. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the lovely session, Deepak. My two takeaways from your session was dream big and inspire your people around you. You never know, your dreams will be answered. Thank you.